And next up, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Kate Vitasek, who will be discussing the vested model and its applications to the current state of supply chain. Thanks for joining us today, Kate.
Thank you. Nice getting to see you guys. And even if it's virtual, this is awesome.
Excellent. So to start things off, Kate, can you just give us a quick introduction on yourself?
Well, I'm a faculty member for graduate and executive education at the University of Tennessee. I'm in the College of Business. I've been there since 2003, and I have the coolest job in the world because I get to study the art, science, and practice of highly collaborative and successful business relationships. So, you really get to dig in and see what's working well, what's not working well, bring that back into our teaching and our courses. So it's really integrating the practical side and the research side. So super fun job.
Excellent. So, many of our viewers will be familiar with the vested model, but for the few that aren't as familiar, can you give us a very high level understanding of it and how it applies to the modern world of supply chain?
Well, the vested model was birthed from our research of studying these deals that worked really well. What were they doing that deals that were just ho-hum or very transactional weren't doing? Why were these getting better results? So there are 5 rules and 10 contractual elements. And so think of it as a methodology. So you work through the rules and the contractual elements, and you co-create a strategic partnership based on these rules. So if you have a very transactional relationship and it's just not working as well for you, you can actually restructure that. You can change the rules of the game by actually reflecting new rules in how you work.
Excellent. So, when it comes to that transactional element, I'd just like you to explain what are companies doing wrong when it comes to how they're currently negotiating their contracts?
Well, I'll start with your word negotiating, right? So they're negotiating instead of creating a strategic partnership and co-creating that strategic partnership. So we're approaching these deals as a very traditional buyer supplier. I think of it as a tug of war, right? You played tug of war when you were a kid, and you had the rope in between you and you're pulling back and forth and back and forth, and the bigger guy, the one with the most power, won. And sometimes, if you're losing, you get someone else to gang up on your team. And so that's what we're doing in these transactional relationships. It's all about, the per mile, the per shipment, per widget. And we're not really thinking about what problems we're trying to solve. I like to think about a vested agreement. It's very much business outcome. So a company has a certain amount of budget that they're trying to spend. How do I optimize my budget? And how do I optimize my customer service? So it may mean that we're actually working to rethink how we work with our service providers instead of simply buying from point A to point B. If you're buying from point A to point B, you're going to get point A to point B. And the price will fluctuate versus supply and demand. And sometimes the buyers have the better power, and sometimes the suppliers have the better power. And so you're just in this constant power struggle. And in a vested relationship, we kind of think of moving away from a what's in it for me, this buy, sell, transactional, to a what's in it for we strategic partnership. So they are more long-term in nature. They're outcome-based. They're highly collaborative. You're creating the contract that is a formal relational contract. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to partner with you over an extended period of time to solve my business problems, to optimize for my logistics, not just for you to get me a shipment from point A to point B, or to store my stuff in your warehouse and charge me a per pallet fee.
Definitely. So, we all know about the modern supply chain challenges that we're seeing all around the world. Can you just explain for the companies that have been following the vested model, how they're better navigating the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing right now?
So that's a great question, and actually something that we love to profile. So we have about 50 organizations have done about 80 deals, vested deals. And we try to profile them in public case studies because we believe that the more we have public case studies, the more people can learn from what others have done. So a great example of one of our public case studies is actually Intel and DHL in the Netherlands. So Intel has a certain product portfolio that is going away. They're just getting out of this business. So what 3PL wants to service a dying business? Kind of like, oh yeah, here's my volumes, and I look, and over time they're going down to zero. And so they knew that it was just going to be this never-ending battle because volumes were going to be decreasing. But couldn't they work together to actually optimize how Intel exit the market? And so DHL's profits are actually based on optimizing the exit, knowing that in 7 years they were going to be out of it, right? So they totally different mindset. So you're my partner to help me exit. Yes, this is my volume now. I'm going to be very transparent. We're going to show you how that's going to be again, and you're going to help me with planning. You're going to bring in different processes, so the way you would exit a market, you might invest in processes that optimize smaller sizes versus what you're doing. So you would really trying to collaborate to solve business problems. And it doesn't have to be, these massive, transformational efforts. It could often be a series of continuous improvement and evolutions as to how you drive change. Great examples, the pandemic, right? Gosh, it keeps throwing us curveballs left and right. And so we like to think of these as ponies. And people go, pony? What do you mean by a pony? And I get this, the concept of a pony from Ronald Reagan. He was famous for telling the story about two twins, the optimist and the pessimist. And he puts the pessimist in a room full of manure, and the kid's like, oh, it's horrible, it's horrible in here. I've got all these toys, and he puts toys in manure, and he's like, I have all these toys, but they're ruined. And then he has the other kid, and he's like, oh, look at all this, with all this crap in here. There's bound to be a pony in here somewhere. And so how are you looking at what you're doing? Are you looking at it that you have opportunities? Are you collaborating? Are you working together? Is it a win-win, right? So what supplier wants to work with you that it's a constant battle of scope and price and shipment A to shipment B, and you're just not working well together? So we want to create these agreements that puts the relationship first, has the governance mechanisms, and has win-win economics. So you win together and you lose together. And so when I'm in a buy-sell transactional, I can win at your expense. The market fluctuates, and we're constantly in this tug of war.
Definitely. So, obviously some companies have not been following this model, right? So what advice would you give to the shippers out there that's seeing their logistics partners renege on current contracts that they have? And how can the vested model help them with some of those challenges?
Well, the sad thing is, the bigger the shipper, the more power they have. And there's this false illusion that because they're big and they have a lot of money to spend, that they have power. Well, in reality, the more they use their power, abuse the power, the shippers, now have a lot of inherent power in the market. And so they're like, you've screwed me over in the past, tit for tat, it's my turn, right? And so we have to break this tit for tat cycle of the market dynamics, because it goes through cycles. And some years the buyers have power, some years the shippers have power. And we have such short-term memories, right? And so I think we need to look over time and go, look, the power shifts with supply and demand and the different market things. So why don't we try to be on the same team? So I would say the advice is change your mindset. Look at it over time, realize that there's going to be cycles, and try to work together to optimize your supply chain, not buy and sell at a point in time on a transactional basis. But if I don't have that mindset, it's really hard to change the game. And this is where the rules come in, right? You're playing a transactional game and you've got transactional rules. If you want to change, if you're not happy with your game, change the rules of your game. And that's what we teach. Step by step, buyers and suppliers come together and they rewrite the rules. And those rules are manifested in their actual contract. So it's no longer a transactional contract. They're contracted for a strategic partnership to optimize their supply chain.
Definitely. So, this makes a lot of sense, and it seems like obvious that this is what you should be doing. But for some employees, their mindset is not of that way yet, at least. So how can we help our employees to foster these non-transactional relationships?
Well, it starts with leadership fostering the mindset, right? So we always say, oh, it's the employees. But often companies actually have policies that prevent them from doing the things we teach. So for example, especially the larger companies, they think they're just these experts. And so they create these policies that protect themselves. And in reality, they can backfire. A great one would be Gosh, we've seen companies that have an every dollar every year philosophy. So they're, you're just the transportation provider, and so they're bidding out their transportation very frequently because they're trying to beat the market. Well, why don't they take and say, hey, I'm looking for a partner who's going to work with me over a 3, 5, 7 year plan to actually beat the market in aggregate. And so if I have this policy of frequent bidding, or if I have a standard term contract terms and conditions, right? So, oh, sorry, you have to use my standard contract terms. Well, think about the simple termination for convenience clause that buyers like to put in. Oh, you're not performing. Yeah, I'm going to get you out. Termination for convenience. What CFO of a third-party logistics provider would want to make investments in their customer if they can be fired after a shipment or after 60 days? So what buyers don't realize is that they, like it or not, create the environment that leads the suppliers. So the more they're buyers, the more the suppliers are suppliers. And the more they use their heavy hand when they had power, and the power shifts, the more now the suppliers will use their heavy hand. So you have to step back, and it's not just the employees, it's the leadership saying, we need to change. And to create that environment where it's okay for the employees to come together and work differently. And I think that's what we've done so well at the University of Tennessee with our process, because a buyer and a supplier team come together and they learn at the same time, and they do at the same time. So they're co-creating the new rules. I'm not buying and selling. We're going to say that game doesn't work for us anymore. We're going to come and learn. And as we learn a rule, we're going to rewrite the rule, and those new rules become your contract. Learning and doing together, combined at the same time.
Definitely. So, I mean, we live in an environment that obviously champions those hard skills that we all know very, very well. When it comes to the soft skills, what are the soft skills that employees need to help foster these non-transactional relationships?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and one that we teamed with APQC on to study. They did, APQC does all these benchmarking studies. It's an organization of most of the Fortune 500 companies out there are members of APQC's benchmarking. And so they did a survey of 204 organizations about the talents that people needed to, really drive these new, more flexible, collaborative ways of working with their suppliers. And they broke it down into various skills. So obviously companies have the functional skills, and I think they've nailed that. They know the functional skills. It's all these other skills. Business acumen, general business skills, having the financial understanding, doing business cases. If a supplier has an idea, how do I value that idea? And having the skills to understand how to collaborate and manage these relationships differently. So when I'm collaborating, and I have a win-win deal, I have to think about not having a price, but a pricing model with incentives. These people only know about price. What's the price per, to go from A to B? And so we need to have more of these general business skills, more collaboration skills, and moving away from, yes, I'm awesome at my functional skill, to say, you know what, maybe I'm not awesome, because the supplier, this is all they do for a living. Why am I trying to manage that supplier instead of collaborating with them so that they can solve my problem better? So we need to move away from these management functional skills and micromanaging the supplier to actually collaborating with them, inspiring them, crafting win-win deals so that the supplier is on your team.
Definitely. So what are some of the ways that you help, say, your students foster some of these soft skills that you just mentioned?
Well, we integrate the learning and the doing. And so we have classes that just teach awareness and like what is vested. For example, our orientation class is an online free class, and it's just, Kate lecturing, and there's some reading and different things, but it's here, learn the basics. But when you come to our executive education classes or move into our more advanced implementation courses, our creating a vested agreement, the buyer and the supplier nominate a team, and the team takes the class over time. So the goal, your homework, is your new contract. It is your new relationship. And so what we've really done is integrated the skills, these softer skills that we're teaching, into the process. So they start, and instead of negotiating, they're collaboratively contracting. In the end, they have their new contract. So they become vested. So you're not just learning about vested, you're learning the skills and you're applying the skills. We call it real play. So instead of role playing, you're real playing. You're taking your real deal and you're redoing it, learning both the buyer and the supplier at the exact same time to apply those skills and rethink and restructure how they work.
Perfect. So I think you're very, very well positioned to deal with this challenge, or help companies deal with this challenge. And that is the issue of hiring and retaining top talents. What advice would you give to the companies that are struggling to hire and retain top talent?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, it's just like supply and demand, right? So now the employees have more power. But people like to work for people they like. And so really think about the culture you're creating. Because if somebody loves their boss and they love their company, it's way, way harder for them to leave. And so hire someone for cultural fit and really try to establish, a culture of autonomy, and, not just here's the functional skill, you're the butt in the seat. That's a transaction. If we treat our employees like a transaction, we're going to get a transaction. So treat our employees, like we would want to be treated. Don't just put them in a box and say, this is the job and here's the price per hour, or price, your salary for the year. But give them challenges and say, hey, here's our problem. We've got this really cool problem I want you to work on. So let them do things that develop their mind as well as, their butt. There's some really good research, economic research around innovation and economic value. 87% of economic value comes from brain power. Right? It's process improvements, product improvements. Only 13% of economic value comes from labor and buildings and assets. So we need labor and we need assets, but it's our brains. And we aren't buying brains today. We're buying butts, especially in the supply chain and logistics space. And so we need to buy brain power, and we need to reward our employees for brain power and, give them the autonomy, carve off part of their time that they get to work on something cool. Because if they're working on something really cool, why would they want to go leave for another 50 cents for someone else? And especially if you're willing to put skin in the game and those employees bring value, they create value, you share that value back in terms of bonuses. I mean, one of the classic examples of this done extraordinarily well is Rocky Flats, the Department of Energy in Rocky Flats, and how they worked with the union workers to close and clean up the Rocky Flats environmental site. The Rocky Flats is where they manufactured plutonium triggers between 1952 and 1989. And so you had these workers, that's all they did. They showed up and they manufactured plutonium triggers. And they said, we've got to close this place. By the way, when we close it, you're out of a job. Who wants that job? You've had a union job for a long time, making a lot of money. You don't want your plant to go away. So they actually, when there were the contractor that they hired to manage this, actually created a bonus pool. And so 20% of all of the value that was created was given straight back to the union employees. Millions of dollars. They had $587 million in savings that were created from ideas. Patents were created. This isn't some stupid union worker. These are guys who do the job every day and know a better, faster, cheaper way to do the job, but we don't listen to them. And we definitely don't give them love and money when they bring forward our ideas. Well, we've done it that way. So we have to really create win-win, not just with our suppliers, but all the way down to our employees.
Perfect. I mean, this time's gone very, very quickly. So just ending on a slightly different note, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given during your career?
Well, it actually comes from when I was a student at the University of Tennessee. We had a class called the Executive in Residence class, and every week we had a different executive come and visit. And one of the executives, and I wish I could give attribution, I don't remember who this is, but it's the single best tip I've ever heard, is everything is a pilot and a draft. And so you've got an idea that's a pilot or a draft, because that opens it up, that it's not this yes, no, but hey, here's something, what do you think? And it opens the door for co-creation and to say, well, if it doesn't work, let's just pilot it, because if it doesn't work, we don't have to do it. So it gives people and organizations permission to try. And I think that's what we need today. We need to give people permission to try different things. You know, change, we're so embedded in the status quo and these ways we're working with suppliers, supplier management, right? It should be strategic relationship management. And so we aren't challenging ourselves to change, or we say lip service to change, but we're not physically driving the change. And so try pilots. If it doesn't work, try something else. So it should be constant change, should be the status quo.
Excellent. Really appreciate that, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Excellent. Well, glad to be with you guys, and looking forward to enjoying an awesome virtual conference.